Once again, we take a dive into the wonderful, zany, and is it even true world of the old classical historian Suetonius from ancient Rome and his book, The 12 Caesars. We're still early in there, reading this one paragraph at a time, me for the first time. Maybe it is for you as well, which is my secret cunning plan to get more people from the working class world like myself to get into classics. Uh, I'm Circling Mawas. You can call me Will. When we last left off, on paragraph 56, Caesar just. Well, Suetonius found new ways to breathe life into the scandalous behaviors of Julius Caesar. We thought he slept around a lot before. We found out it was even worse. We thought he was greedy. No, he was even greedier. We thought he was lascivious. No, it got worse. However, he's not a drunk, and he may have liked fast food without complaining. So, pros and cons. So, we left off with a compliment about his war tactics, and his eloquence in speech, and the dubious nature of some of the so-called speeches that he gave that were written down, which Augustus attested he thought were false, and so on. We're still waiting for to get back to the point Suetonius left us with a few videos back where he said, "Oh, and then Caesar got killed by his buddies." Anyway, let me go back and talk more bad stuff on him. So we're still trying to work our way back to that momentous occasion on the Ides of March 44 before the Common Era, or BC for history folks. So we're going to get in paragraph 56 now, see how far I can take this, and let's see what else we can learn about Caesar, and will we regret it? Paragraph 56. He was likewise, he has likewise left commentaries of his own actions both in the war in Gaul and in the civil war with Pompey. Uh, Now, I think the war in Gaul, I think you can get his writings on that. And I've heard some people say it's kind of dry for a person who, in this book anyway, is said it was great speech writing. But maybe he wasn't as great with uh, writing his thoughts down in hindsight. Maybe he was better in person on off the cuff. Never know. I haven't read those yet, but I might want to get a hand of that and maybe read it for future videos. For the author of the Alexandrian, African, and Spanish wars is not known with any certainty. Some think they are the production of Oppius and some of Hirtius, the latter of whom composed the last book, which is imperfect, of the Gallic War. Of Caesar's commentary, Cicero in his Brutus speaks thus, quote, "He wrote his commentaries in a manner deserving of great approbation. They are plain, precise, and elegant, without any affectation of rhetorical ornament. In having thus prepared materials for others who might be inclined to write his history, he may perhaps have encouraged some silly creatures to enter upon such a work, who will needs be dressing up his actions in all the extravagance of bombast, but he has discouraged wise men from ever attempting the subject." Hirtius delivers his opinion on these commentaries in the following terms, quote, "So great is the approbation with which they are universally perused, that, instead of browsing, he seems to have precluded the efforts of any future historian." I mean, that's just a statement. Like no other future historian might as well even bother looking it up or detailing it, because Caesar just he set the tone and it cannot be broken. Okay. Yet, with respect to this work, we have more reason to admire him than others, for they only know how well and correctly he has written, but we know likewise how easily and quickly he did it. Pollio Asinius thinks that they were not drawn up with much care, or with a due regard to truth, for he insinuates that Caesar was too hasty of belief in regard to what was performed by others under his orders, and that he has not given a very faithful account of his own acts, either by design or through defect of memory, expressing at the same time an opinion that Caesar intended a new and more correct edition. He has left behind him likewise two books on analogy, with the same number under the title of Anti Cato, and a poem entitled The Itinerary. Of these books, he composed the first about the time of the Battle of Munda, and the last during the 4 and 20 days he employed in his journey from Rome to farther Spain. There are extant some letters of his to the Senate, written in a manner never practiced by any commanders till then, used constantly in their letters to continue the line quite across the sheet, without any folding or distinction of pages. There are extant likewise some letters from him to Cicero and others to his friends concerning his domestic affairs, in which, if there was occasion for secrecy, he wrote in ciphers. That is, he used the alphabet in such a manner that not a single word could be made out. The way to decipher those epistles was to substitute the fourth for the first letter, as D for A, and so for the other letters respectively. Some things likewise pass under his name, said to have been written by him when a boy, or a very young man, as the Encomium of Hercules, a tragedy entitled Oedipus, and a collection of apothegms, all which Augustus forbade to be published in a short and plain letter to Pompeius Macaire, who was employed by him in the arrangement of his libraries. So, not surprising, Caesar was popular and everybody tried to bite off him to make that money. So, not surprising, still happens to this day. Paragraph 57. He was perfect in the use of arms, an accomplished rider, and able to endure fatigue beyond all belief. On a march, he used to go at the head of his troops, sometimes on horseback, but oftener on foot, with his head bare in all kinds of weather. He would travel post in light carriage, without baggage, at the rate of 100 miles a day, I guess. And if he was stopped by floods in the rivers, he swam across, or floated on skins inflated with wind, so that he often anticipated intelligence of his movements. Paragraph 58. In his expeditions, it is difficult to say whether his caution or his daring was most conspicuous. He never marched his army by roads which were exposed to ambuscades without having previously examined the nature of the ground by his scouts, nor did he cross over to Britain, for he carefully examined in person the navigation, the harbors, and the most convenient point of landing in the island. When intelligence was brought to him of the siege of his camp in Germany, he made his way to his troops through the enemy stations in a Gaulish dress. He crossed the sea from Brundisium to Dyrrhachium in the winter, through the midst of the enemy's fleets, and the troops under orders to join him, being slow in their movements, notwithstanding repeated messages to hurry them, but to no purpose, he at last went privately and alone aboard a small vessel in the night time, with his head muffled up. Nor did he make himself known, or suffer the master to put about, although the wind blew strong against him, until they were ready to sink. Paragraph 59. He was never deterred from any enterprise, nor retarded in the prosecution of it by superstition. When a victim which he was about to offer in sacrifice made its escape, he did not therefore defer his expedition against Scipio and Juba, and happening to fall, upon stepping out of the ship, he gave a lucky turn to the omen by exclaiming, quote, I hold thee fast, Africa, to chide the prophecies which were spread abroad, that the name of Scipios was, by the decrees of fate, fortunate and invincible in that province. He retained in the camp a profligate wretch of the family of the Cornelii, who, on account of his scandalous life, was surnamed Salutio. Paragraph 60. He not only fought pitched battles, but made sudden attacks when an opportunity offered, often at the end of a march, and sometimes during the most violent storms, when nobody could imagine he would stir. Nor was he ever backward in fighting, until towards the end of his life. Well, yeah. He then was of opinion that the oftener he had been crowned with success, the less he ought to expose himself to new hazards, and that nothing he could gain by a victory would compensate for what he might lose by a miscarriage. He never defeated the enemy without driving them from their camp, and giving them no time to rally their forces. When the issue of a battle was doubtful, he sent away all the horses, and his own first, that having no means of flight, they might be under the greater necessity of standing their ground. Paragraph 61. He rode a very remarkable horse, with feet almost like those of a man, the hoofs being divided in such a manner as to have some resemblance to toes. This horse he had bred himself, and the soothsayers having interpreted these circumstances into an omen that its owner would be master of the world, he brought him up with particular care and broke him in himself, as the horse would suffer no one else to mount him. A statue of this horse was afterwards erected by Caesar's order before the temple of Venus Genetrix. Paragraph 62. He often rallied his troops when they were giving way by his personal efforts, stopping those who fled, keeping others in their ranks, and seizing them by their throat, turned them towards the enemy, although numbers were so terrified that an eagle bearer, thus stopped, made a thrust at him with the spearhead, and another, upon a similar occasion, left the standard in his hand. Paragraph 63. The following instances of his resolution are equally and even more remarkable. After the battle of Pharsalia, having sent his troops before him into Asia, as he was passing the straits of the Hellespont in a ferry boat, he met with Lucius Cassius, one of the opposite party, with 10 ships of war. And so far from endeavoring to escape, he went alongside his ship, and calling upon him to surrender, Cassius humbly gave him his submission. Paragraph 64. At Alexandria, in the attack of a bridge being forced by a sudden sally of the enemy into a boat, and several others hurrying in with him, he leaped into the sea, and saved himself by swimming to the next ship, which lay at the distance of 200 paces, holding up his left hand out of the water for fear of wetting some papers which he held in it, and pulling his general's cloak after him with his teeth, lest it should fall into the hands of the enemy. I mean, sometimes you just got to do it. Do it. Paragraph 65. He never valued a soldier for his moral conduct or his means, but for his courage only, and treated his troops with a mixture of severity and indulgence, for he did not always keep a strict hand over them, but only when the enemy was near. Then indeed he was so strict a disciplinarian that he would give no notice of a march or a battle until the moment of action, in order that the troops might hold themselves in readiness for any sudden movement, and he would frequently draw them out of the camp without any necessity for it, especially in rainy weather and upon holy days. Sometimes giving them orders not to lose sight of him, he would suddenly depart by day or by night, and lengthen the marches in order to tire them out, as they followed him at a distance. Paragraph 66. When at any time his troops were dispirited by reports of the great force of the enemy, he rallied their courage, not by denying the truth of what was said, or by diminishing the facts, but, on the contrary, by exaggerating every particular. Accordingly, when his troops were in great alarm at the expected arrival of King Juba, he called them together and said, quote, I have to inform you that in a very few days the king will be here, with 10 legions, 30,000 horse, 100,000 light armed foot, and 300 elephants. Let none of you therefore presume to make further inquiry or indulge in conjectures, but take my word for what I tell you, for I have from undoubted intelligence. Otherwise I shall put them aboard an old crazy vessel, and leave them exposed at the mercy of the winds to be transported to some other country. Paragraph 67. He neither noticed all their transgressions, nor punished them according to strict rule. But for deserters and mutineers he made the most diligent inquiry, and their punishment was most severe. Other delinquencies he would connive at. Sometimes after a great battle ending in victory, he would grant them a relaxation from all kinds of duty, and leave them to revel at pleasure, being used to boast, quote, that his soldiers fought nothing the worse for being well oiled. In his speeches he never addressed them by the title of quote unquote soldiers, but by the kinder phrase of quote unquote fellow soldiers, and kept them in such splendid order that their arms were ornamented with silver and gold, not merely for parade, but to render the soldiers more resolute to save them in battle, and fearful of losing them. He loved his troops to such a degree that when he heard of the defeat of those under Titurius, he neither cut his hair nor shaved his beard, until he had revenged it upon the enemy, by which means he engaged their devoted affection, and raised their valor to the highest pitch. All right, I think for this video I'll stop there, and next time we'll pick up with paragraph 68. But we end on the note again about how a lot of Caesar's focus, a lot of his spirit and drive is in the military. It's in his soldiers, it's in his horses, it's in his weaponry, his shields, his armor, his encampments, his foresight, his attention to maneuvers and marching. And all of that, of course, requires an extensive amount of money. So this sort of backs up the sort of things about he needs to get money to keep these types of things going. So again, Suetonius is taking us down that road of, well, this is how bad he is. But then over here, this is how determined how good he was. And it still kind of balances him out a bit. As raucous as Suetonius's writings are, and again, the veracity of them I can't attest to, and other people argue, he still manages to give Caesar some degree of equilibrium. But thank you for coming along on this adventure. Next time we'll pick up with paragraph 58. We'll see where this goes. I am still waiting for us to get to the part where we finish the Caesar chapter of the 12 Caesars, because we have 11 to go. But we'll see what happens. Hopefully, you will like and subscribe, and I will see all of you next time in this video and other videos that I'm doing, readings of other things in shorts. We can get the conversation going. Feel free to comment. I will respond. Until then, you folks stay safe out there. Keep taking in history and knowledge, and I will see you next time.